Emily was reading the same sentence for the third time, but the letters kept jumping across the page, as if mocking her. She gripped her textbook tightly, trying to keep the unruly letters in place. The reading hall of Brookline Middle School was almost empty this early in the morning, but the girl still felt her cheeks burning with shame and frustration. "Miss Thompson says we need to read the whole chapter by the end of the week," she whispered to herself, trying to concentrate. But the more she tried, the more the letters blurred before her eyes. After 5 minutes, Emily gave up and slumped back in her chair, feeling tears welling up. Suddenly, something soft and warm touched her hand. Emily startled and turned her head. Next to her stood a large caramel-colored Labrador with intelligent brown eyes. The dog wore a special harness with "Service Dog" written on it. The dog looked at her with such understanding that for a moment, Emily forgot about her problems. "Hi, I'm Miss Kelly," a soft voice said. Emily looked up and saw a middle-aged woman in a professional suit. "And this is Buffy. She's specially trained to help children with dyslexia. Your mom told me about your reading difficulties, and we're here to meet you." Emily looked from Miss Kelly to the dog and back. "But how can a dog help me read?" she asked skeptically, although her hand was already unconsciously stroking Buffy's soft fur. "Oh, Buffy knows many different ways." Miss Kelly smiled. "For example, she can lie next to you while you read aloud and put her paw on the page to help you track the lines. But most importantly, she never judges and always celebrates your successes, even the smallest ones." Buffy, as if understanding they were talking about her, gently nudged Emily's hand with her nose and sat down beside her, resting her head on the girl's lap. Emily felt something warm spreading in her chest, pushing away the usual fear of reading. "What if I read too slowly or make mistakes?" Emily asked quietly, still afraid to believe in the possibility of change. "You know, Buffy is very patient," Miss Kelly replied, sitting down nearby. "She's worked with many children, and everyone reads at their own pace. The important thing isn't speed, but understanding what you read. And Buffy knows this very well." Emily looked into the dog's kind brown eyes and felt hope for the first time in a long while. Maybe with such a special helper, reading would stop being a daily ordeal. She carefully scratched Buffy behind the ear, and the dog responded with a happy tail wag. "Would you like to try reading to Buffy right now?" Miss Kelly suggested, pulling out a thin book with large letters from her bag. "This is a simple story about a puppy's adventures. Buffy loves listening to it." Emily hesitated, but Buffy looked at her so trustingly that it was impossible to refuse. She took the book with trembling hands and opened the first page. Buffy immediately placed her paw at the beginning of the text, as if showing where to start. Puppy Max loved playing in the garden," Emily began reading. The letters were still jumping, but Buffy's presence was somehow calming. When she finished the first paragraph, the dog gave a quiet bark, as if applauding. Miss Kelly watched them with a smile. She saw how the girl's shoulders gradually relaxed, how a slight smile appeared on her face. The first step had been taken. Outside the library window, the spring sun illuminated the blooming trees of the schoolyard. A new day was beginning, and a new stage in Emily's life was starting, a stage where she finally had a true friend and helper. Through the library window came the school bell. Emily gathered her books, feeling both joy and anxiety. Tomorrow, Buffy would come to class with her for the first time, and just the thought of it made her hands tremble. How would her classmates react? Would she be able to read in front of them as calmly as she did now? Buffy, as if sensing her worry, pressed closer, and in her brown eyes was a silent promise of support. The next morning, the corridors of Brookline Middle School buzzed with excited whispers. "Attention, class! Today we'll be discussing the home reading," Miss Thompson announced, and Emily's heart froze. She sat at the last desk, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. Buffy, who lay next to her chair, sensed the girl's tension and gently touched her hand with her nose. It was Buffy's first day at school, and Emily was worried about how her classmates would react. Earlier that morning, Principal Baker had personally visited the class to explain the presence of a service dog, but that didn't stop the curious glances and whispers. "Emily?" Miss Thompson's voice sounded unexpectedly close. "Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on the first chapter." The girl felt herself blushing. She had spent yesterday evening reading diligently with Buffy, but now all the words seemed to have evaporated from her head. The dog gently nudged her knee, and that gave her a bit of confidence. "The main character, Emily stumbled, but felt Buffy's warm presence and took a deep breath. "He moves to a new town and is afraid he won't find friends, but then he finds an old bicycle in the attic." "Very good, Emily," Miss Thompson nodded encouragingly. "What else did you notice in this chapter?" With each word, Emily's voice grew more confident. She remembered how yesterday she had read aloud and Buffy had listened attentively, occasionally encouraging her with quiet barks. Now, feeling the same support, she was able to recount the main events of the chapter. During the break, Sarah Chen, her classmate from the next desk, approached Emily. "Can I pet your dog?" she asked shyly. Emily glanced at Miss Kelly, who was watching from afar, and she nodded. "Her name is Buffy," Emily replied. "She's a service dog, so you can't distract her while she's working. But it's break time now." Soon a small group of children gathered around them. Buffy behaved impeccably, allowing herself to be petted but not moving away from Emily. For the first time in a long while, her classmates were talking to her about something other than her reading problems. "Is it true that she understands everything you say?" asked Jason, the boy who usually sat in front of her. "She's very smart," Emily replied proudly, "and she helps me with reading. Look." She took out a book, and Buffy immediately placed her paw at the beginning of the page. "Cool," Sarah exclaimed. "Can we watch how you study with her?" Emily hesitated. Until now, she had been embarrassed to read in front of others, but Buffy was looking at her with such confidence. "Maybe during lunch break in the library?" she suggested, surprising herself. After lunch, several classmates gathered in the library. Emily read slowly, sometimes stumbling, but no one laughed. Buffy sat beside her, carefully tracking the text, while the children watched with genuine fascination. "You're doing great," Sarah said as they were returning to class. "And Buffy is just super. Can I sometimes read with you?" Emily felt warmth spreading inside. "Of course," she replied, scratching Buffy behind the ear. "I think she'd like that." At home, doing her homework, Emily thought about this day. It wasn't perfect. She still made mistakes when reading, and some kids still looked at her strangely. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone in her struggle. Buffy lay nearby, her head on Emily's lap, while she tried to tackle another paragraph. When the letters started jumping, it was enough to bury her fingers in the soft fur to find calm and focus again. "Tomorrow will be easier," Emily whispered, and Buffy gave a quiet bark in response. Through the open window came the scent of spring flowers, and the sounds of the evening street. Emily started packing her books into her backpack when she noticed a note from Miss Thompson. Next week, the class would have a group project in literature. A week had passed since Buffy first appeared in class. Emily was just finishing her homework when she noticed a red note from Miss Thompson in her diary. Next Monday, the class would have a group project in literature. Buffy, who was dozing nearby, raised her head, sensing her companion's tension. "Group projects," Emily whispered to herself, already imagining standing alone while others chose their partners. This time would be different. At least now she had Buffy. The next morning, as Miss Thompson announced the project details, Emily was nervously petting Buffy's ear. "Each team will prepare a presentation based on their assigned book," the teacher explained. "You won't just retell the plot. You'll create a live scene with the main events." Emily felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. Group projects had always been challenging for her. No one wanted to team up with a girl who could barely read. Buffy, sensing her state, laid her head on her lap. "I've already divided you into groups," Miss Thompson continued, and Emily breathed a sigh of relief. At least she wouldn't have to stand aside while others chose partners. "Emily, you'll be working with Sarah and Jason." Sarah waved happily from the second row, and Jason turned around and winked. Over the past week, they had often come to the library to watch Emily study with Buffy, and they seemed genuinely interested. During the break, the three students gathered in a quiet corner of the library. Buffy settled by Emily's feet, watching the discussion attentively. "We have Bridge to Terabithia," Sarah said, flipping through the book. "There are many important scenes we could show." "I can be Jessie," Jason suggested. "And you, Sarah, will be Leslie. Emily can." I'd rather narrate," Emily quickly said. The thought of learning a role and performing in front of the whole class frightened her. "Exactly," Sarah exclaimed. "You'll be the narrator. And you know what? Buffy can participate too. Remember the scene where Jessie and Leslie find the abandoned puppy?" Emily pondered. She felt more confident with Buffy nearby. But would they allow them to use a service dog in the school play? "We need to ask Miss Kelly," she finally said. "And practice well. I need lots of practice to read in front of the class." "We can rehearse every day after school," Jason suggested. "I have an idea. Let's try reading together. You read a sentence, and I repeat it as Jessie. That way, you can practice, and it'll be part of the performance." Miss Kelly, whom they found in the teacher's lounge, listened carefully to their plan. "That's a wonderful idea," she said. "Buffy can help create the right atmosphere. But remember, she's primarily a service dog and needs to stay close to Emily." The following days were filled with rehearsals. Emily discovered that reading was easier when the text was woven into a performance. Jason and Sarah patiently waited when she stumbled, and Buffy, as always, helped track the lines. However, one day, when there was less than a week until the performance, an unpleasant incident occurred. During rehearsal in the assembly hall, a class of younger students passed by. One boy, seeing Buffy, loudly exclaimed, "Look! She needs a dog to learn how to read, like a baby." Emily froze mid-sentence, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. Buffy tensed, ready to protect her charge, but Sarah had already jumped to her feet. "Do you know that dogs like Buffy save lives? They help people see, hear, and do many important things," she burst out. "And for your information, our Emily will be the star of the show." Jason stood next to Sarah. "Exactly, and we're proud to work with her on our team." Emily looked at her friends with wide eyes. She was used to adults protecting her, Miss Kelly, Miss Thompson, Mom. But classmates. That evening, doing her homework, Emily suddenly realized that for the first time in a long while, she couldn't wait to return to school the next day. Buffy lay nearby, and the girl scratched her behind the ear. "You know, Buffy," she whispered, "it seems I now have not one, but 3 protectors." The dog responded with a soft growl, and in her intelligent eyes was understanding. Their small team was growing stronger. 3 days remained until the presentation. Emily sat on her bedroom floor, surrounded by papers with notes. Buffy lay nearby, her head resting on Emily's lap. On the wall hung a homemade poster where Sarah had drawn scenes from Bridge to Terabithia, their props for the performance. And then Jessie realized that true magic existed not in the magical kingdom, but in... Emily stumbled, the letters starting to dance before her eyes again. She took a deep breath, as Miss Kelly had taught her, and felt Buffy gently nudging her hand with her nose. But in friendship and imagination, she finished the sentence. This time, the text was longer than anything she had ever read in front of the class. Jason and Sarah had figured out how to break it into small parts between scenes, but Emily still had to read several long paragraphs on her own. Her mother's voice drifted up from downstairs. "Emily, dinner time, and Sarah's here." Minutes later, Sarah was sitting next to Emily on the floor, treating Buffy to dog treats that Miss Kelly had allowed as rewards during training. "I came up with something for our performance," Sarah said, pulling a folded paper from her backpack. "Look, it's a special bookmark. We can print your text in larger letters and divide it with colored lines. When you're reading, Buffy can use her paw to show where we are." Emily took the bookmark with trembling hands. The paper was divided into colored sections that perfectly matched the pauses in their play. "This might actually work," she whispered. "Of course it will," Sarah hugged her friend. "You know what Jason said? That our play will be the best because we have a secret weapon. Buffy." The next day, during the final rehearsal in the assembly hall, Miss Thompson watched their performance. Emily began reading, and Buffy, as always, carefully tracked the text. When the girl reached a difficult passage with many long words, the dog placed her paw on the colored line, reminding her that she could pause there. "Wonderful, children," Miss Thompson praised when they finished. "I especially liked how you included Buffy in the scene with the dog in the forest. It adds a special sense of reality." However, lying in bed that night, Emily couldn't sleep. What if she forgot the text? What if the letters started jumping again, and she ruined the entire performance? Buffy, who was sleeping on her mat by the bed, raised her head, sensing her companion's unease. "Buffy, come here," Emily whispered, and the dog immediately approached, resting her muzzle on the edge of the bed. In the darkness, her eyes seemed especially wise. "I'm scared," the girl confessed, burying her fingers in the soft fur. "What if I let everyone down? Jason and Sarah tried so hard." Buffy whimpered softly and licked her hand. This simple gesture reminded Emily of their first day together in the library. Back then, she was scared too, but with each day, reading became easier. Maybe it would be the same with the performance. With this thought, Emily finally fell asleep, not noticing that her hands still rested on Buffy's head. The service dog remained on guard, watching over her little friend's dreams. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them together. The morning of the performance began with a surprise. Emily woke up to Buffy's wet nose touching her cheek. She had been so nervous that she'd slept through her alarm. Mom had already called her twice for breakfast. "Oh no! Oh no!" Emily muttered, quickly pulling on her school uniform. Buffy brought her the harness laid out on the floor, and the girl couldn't help but smile. Even on such a tense morning, her four-legged friend didn't forget about her duties. A festive atmosphere filled the school. The assembly hall was decorated with drawings of characters from the books that different teams would present. Jason met them at the entrance, holding a homemade cardboard sword. "Em, how are you?" he asked, noticing his friend's pale face. "Fine," Emily lied, gripping Buffy's leash tighter. "Just a bit nervous." "Everyone's nervous," came Sarah's voice as she ran up to them with a box of props. Even Peter from the second group, though he bragged about being in drama club. Their performance was third in the program. While the first two groups showed their scenes, Emily sat backstage, reviewing the text. The letters started jumping again, and she felt panic rising in her throat. "Emily," Miss Kelly appeared as if from nowhere. "Try not to look at the text right now. You know it by heart. Better look at Buffy and take a few deep breaths." The girl looked up at her service dog. Buffy sat nearby, radiating calm and confidence. Her brown eyes looked at Emily with such understanding that the panic began to slowly retreat. And now, Sarah, Jason, and Emily's team with their performance of Bridge to Terabithia. Miss Thompson announced. The first few minutes passed as if in a fog. Emily watched Jason and Sarah act out the scene of the main character's first meeting. Her turn was getting closer. "Now listen to the story of a special place that two friends created with the power of their imagination," Emily whispered, and suddenly realized her voice was trembling so much that hardly anyone could hear her. At that moment, Buffy, who sat beside her, placed her large paw on the text, exactly on the colored line where they needed to start. This familiar gesture, which they had practiced hundreds of times, suddenly restored Emily's sense of confidence. "Now listen to the story of a special place," she began again, this time clearly and loudly. "A place that two friends created with the power of their imagination." With each sentence, her voice grew more confident. When Jason and Sarah acted out the scene of rescuing the puppy, Buffy gave a quiet bark, adding realism to the performance. The audience gasped in delight, then laughed. Emily read the final part of the text, almost without looking at the paper. She knew these words by heart, felt them in her soul. And then Jessie understood that true magic exists not in the magical kingdom, but in friendship and imagination, in the strength we find when someone believes in us. The hall erupted in applause. Emily saw Miss Thompson wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, Miss Kelly smiling proudly. But most important were Sarah and Jason's hugs, and Buffy's warm muzzle pressing against her knee. "You were incredible," Sarah whispered. "Best narrator ever," Jason added. And Buffy just looked at her with her intelligent eyes, and in them was written, "I always knew you could do it." That evening, writing down her homework, Emily noticed something strange. The letters weren't jumping around as much as before. Maybe they had just gotten tired of dancing. Or maybe she had finally found her way to tame them, with the help of a faithful friend who never doubted her. After the successful performance, something changed in Emily's school life. Now, when she entered the classroom with Buffy, her classmates greeted her not just out of politeness, but with genuine smiles. Some even asked permission to pet the dog during breaks, remembering the rule not to distract a service dog while working. But the biggest change happened during English class, when Miss Thompson asked for volunteers to read aloud from a new book. Emily unexpectedly raised her hand. It happened so quickly that she didn't even have time to feel scared. "Please, Emily." Miss Thompson couldn't hide her joyful surprise. Buffy immediately moved closer, ready to help. But this time, the text was new. They hadn't practiced reading it at home. Emily felt her heart beating faster. She took a deep breath and began to read. The letters still jumped a little, but now the girl knew the secret. Just take small pauses and not be afraid. When she finished the paragraph, silence fell over the classroom. "Excellent, Emily," Miss Thompson praised. "You read that very expressively, especially the part describing the storm." After class, Lisa, a quiet girl who usually sat in the front row, approached her. "Emily," she began shyly, could you help me?" "Help? With what?" Emily was surprised. "You see, I'm not very good at reading either. Not because of dyslexia, just afraid to read aloud. And you're doing so well now." Emily looked uncertainly at Buffy. The dog wagged her tail in response, as if saying, "You know what to do." "We can practice together in the library," Emily suggested. "Buffy helps me track the lines. Maybe it will help you too." That same day after school, they settled in their favorite corner of the library. Lisa was as scared as Emily had felt just a few weeks ago. "Look," Emily explained, "when I read, I imagine I'm telling the story to Buffy. She never laughs or interrupts, and you can take breaks when you need to catch your breath." Gradually, Lisa began to relax. Buffy, who usually only worked with Emily, seemed to understand the special nature of the situation. She alternately placed her paw on both girls' books, helping them track the text. "You're doing great," Emily encouraged when Lisa finished reading the first paragraph. "You know, I used to read very slowly too, but Miss Kelly says it's not about speed, it's about understanding the text." "Who's Miss Kelly?" Lisa asked. "Oh, she's Buffy's trainer. She taught us many useful techniques. Want me to show you the special bookmark with colored lines next time? It helps keep track of the line." Suddenly, Miss Kelly appeared in the library. She watched with surprise as Buffy worked with both girls simultaneously. "Emily," she called, "can I talk to you for a moment?" Emily worried. Had she broken some rule? But Miss Kelly was smiling. "You know, I'm impressed with how you're helping Lisa," she said. "That's very mature of you. But I have something to suggest." The girl listened attentively, and her eyes grew wider with surprise. It turned out there was a program in the city where children with experience working with service dogs could help other children in the library. Of course, under a trainer's supervision. "What do you think? Would you like to try?" Miss Kelly asked. "Once a week after school. Buffy already knows what to do, and you'll explain things wonderfully." Emily looked at Lisa, who was still sitting at the table, petting Buffy. Then she remembered her first day in the library, her fear and uncertainty, and how everything changed thanks to one special dog. "Yes," she answered firmly. "I want to try." Buffy, hearing her words, raised her head and gave a quiet bark, as if approving this decision. Now they could help other children find their way to books, step by step, line by line. Emily nervously arranged bookmarks on the table in the children's section of the city library. Today was her first official day as a helper in the Reading with Dogs program. Buffy, already in her working harness with a new Reading Together badge, lay calmly nearby. "Remember," Miss Kelly reminded her, arranging the books, "today we'll have 3 children. Each will have 15 minutes. You don't have to do anything special. Just tell them how Buffy helps you read. The first to arrive was a little boy, Tommy, with his mom. He hid behind her skirt and refused to approach the table. Emily suddenly remembered herself. Hadn't she been just as scared at first? "Hi, Tommy," she said softly. "You know, Buffy really loves stories about dinosaurs, especially T-Rex. Do you like dinosaurs?" The boy nodded shyly, still holding on to his mom. "I have just such a book. Want to read it together? Buffy will show us with her paw where we're reading." Within minutes, Tommy was sitting next to Buffy, showing her pictures in the book. He stumbled on almost every word, but the dog waited patiently, and Emily encouraged him just as others had once encouraged her. The second was a girl named Grace. She immediately declared that she hated reading because all the letters looked the same. Emily took out her special bookmark with colored sections. "You know, I had the same problem," she shared, "but Buffy taught me a trick. Look, the last child that day, Lucas, proved to be the most challenging case. He was almost Emily's age and was clearly embarrassed about his poor reading. When he saw the lower grade book that Miss Kelly had prepared, his face darkened. "Maybe this one?" Emily quickly pulled out Bridge to Terabithia. "It's my favorite. We can read it taking turns, like I do with my friends at school." Lucas looked at her in surprise. You read with friends too?" "Of course. Last week, we even performed a play based on this book. And you know what? At first, I was afraid to perform, but Buffy helped me." Gradually, Lucas began to relax. They took turns reading paragraphs, and although the boy often stopped at difficult words, Emily waited patiently, just as her friends had once waited for her. After the sessions, Miss Kelly gathered them for a brief discussion. "How do you feel?" she asked Emily. "Strange," the girl admitted, scratching Buffy behind the ear. "But you know, when I see them getting excited about reading a difficult word, it's like I'm experiencing my first successes all over again." "That's because you remember your own path," Miss Kelly smiled, "and now you can show the way to others." The maple leaves outside the Brookline Middle School library were starting to turn yellow. 3 months had passed since Emily first tried her role as a helper in the reading program. Now she sat at the same table where she had first met Buffy, but everything was different. And then the little prince understood that what is essential is invisible to the eye. Lucas read, following the lines with his finger. Buffy, as always, carefully tracked the text. While Emily smiled quietly, he barely stumbled on difficult words anymore. "Excellent, Lucas," praised Miss Kelly, who was observing them. "You've made tremendous progress." The boy beamed. "It's all thanks to Emily and Buffy. You know, I've even started reading to my little sister before bedtime." After the session, Miss Kelly asked Emily to stay. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling out an envelope. Inside was a photograph. Emily, Buffy, and a group of children from the reading program, all smiling with books in their hands. "This is for the program's new brochure," Miss Kelly explained. "You know, after your performance at school, more children started coming to us. Your story inspires them." Emily took the photograph with trembling hands. Everyone was there. Shy Tommy, who now read whole books about dinosaurs. Grace, who stopped being afraid of letters. Lucas, who had become almost like a brother to her. And of course, Buffy, constant, faithful Buffy. "I also have news," Miss Kelly continued. "Next month, there's a conference about service dogs in the city. We've been invited to talk about the reading program. How about presenting together? Present? In front of adults?" Emily felt her heart beating faster. But this wasn't the paralyzing fear from before. Rather, it was exciting anticipation. That evening, walking home from school, Emily and Buffy took a small detour through the park. The girl sat on a bench, took out her old diary from her backpack. Flipping through the pages, she saw her journey, from the first uncertain reading attempts to the latest entries about her students' successes. "Strange, isn't it?" she said to Buffy, who settled beside her. "I used to be afraid of people finding out about my dyslexia. And now I'm helping others not to be afraid of their difficulties." Buffy laid her head on her lap, and Emily buried her fingers in the soft fur. She remembered her first day in the library, her tears and fears. Who would have thought that in just a few months, her life would change so much? Children's laughter drifted from the playground in the park. Emily took a new book from her backpack, this time not for practice, but for pleasure. The Little Prince, the same one they had just been reading with Lucas. "Shall we read a bit before it gets dark?" she asked Buffy. The dog wagged her tail in response and immediately placed her paw on the first page. Emily opened the book, and the letters that once seemed like such frightening enemies now looked like old friends. They still sometimes misbehaved, but now the girl knew. Together with Buffy, she could tame any letters, overcome any obstacles. "When you look with your heart," Emily began reading in a confident voice, "what is essential becomes visible." In the rays of the setting sun, the girl with the dog on the park bench looked like an ordinary scene. But for those who knew their story, it was a picture of victory. Victory over fear, over insecurity, over loneliness. And most importantly, it was a picture of friendship that opens doors to a world of new possibilities. Many adventures still awaited them. The conference, new students, new books. But now Emily knew. Together with Buffy, she was ready for any challenges. After all, they had already found the most important thing: belief in herself and the power to help others.